Recently, you guys may have heard me constantly talk about PlayStation VR's growing library, and its library is getting quite good. Initially, PlayStation VR had a few interesting experiences, but I have to say that the library didn't have a lot of depth to it back a couple years ago. Now in 2018, that is not the case anymore, and it seems like not a lot of light is being shed on that, but PlayStation VR has so many quality games across a wide variety of different genres: platformers, multiplayer first-person shooters, action-adventure games, horror games, single-player first-person shooter games, quality RPGs. It's all there on PSVR. Now, I do have to say not every single one of these experiences are absolute home runs, but there is definite quality here, and if you're interested in VR, you should know that going in. And in this video, we want to take a look at the top 10 best PlayStation VR games so far. Without further ado, let's get right into it. First up, I'm going to mention the game that everybody's been talking about recently, and that is Astrobot Rescue Mission. Astrobot Rescue Mission was a game that was getting a ton of hype right prior to its release. People were saying that this could be the Super Mario 64 of VR, and it could be a game of that quality, and it could do what that game did for platformers to VR. Maybe that was a bit of a hyperbolic statement, but what I do have to say is Astrobot Rescue Mission is without a doubt the best game for PSVR to date. This is a game that was designed fundamentally from the ground up for PSVR, and that shows. And not only that, it nails the VR elements, but this is just a very well-crafted platformer that is complemented by VR. And that's what you really want out of an experience like this. I also want to give you guys Metacritic scores for each of these games, and Astrobot Rescue Mission is sitting at the top in terms of VR Metacritic scores at a 90. Next up, we have another very recent release, and that is Firewall 0 Hour. This is a game that I talked quite a bit about around the time of its release, but it's a traditional multiplayer experience with VR. And with this game, they did the traditional experience right. It's not losing anything by making the transition to VR, but VR is also adding to the experience that you're getting. A lot of gamers will compare this to Rainbow Six Siege, and I don't want you guys to go in expecting a game of that quality caliber, but it is definitely good, and it's sitting at a 79 on Metacritic.
Under 6, skip. Alright, let's get in position for breach. Get C4 out. Move in, move in, move in! They're breaching the front door. Enemy down. Moving on them.
Next up, we have Moss. Moss was a very charming action-adventure VR game, and at the same time, while you look at this game from the surface, maybe you're just seeing a quirky game and nothing that's really all too special, but then you actually start playing the game, and you realize it's actually a very absorbing and captivating experience. By the way, for those of you without PSVR right now, there is a bundle that includes Moss and Astrobot Rescue Mission, arguably the two best games on PSVR with the headset. So if you're looking for a bundle to buy, that is the one I would absolutely recommend, and Moss has an 85 on Metacritic.
And evening falls with crimson glow. Into the forest I will fly, and in its shadow find you bow.
Next up, we gotta mention a horror game, because horror and VR seem to be a match made in heaven, and that's why I want to give a recommendation to The Persistence. There have been a lot of horror experiences on VR, and I have to say the majority of them have fell kind of flat. Resident Evil 7 was good, but Resident Evil 7 was also a game that wasn't designed with VR in mind. It's a game where VR was kind of tacked on, and I think a lot of people just preferred to play that game with its traditional controls. The Persistence, on the other hand, this is a VR horror experience that really gets it right. It utilizes VR to add to the horror elements, and while I wouldn't say it's perfect, it really shows a gigantic step forward in terms of horror game development on VR. It's at a 78 on Metacritic. Next up, we have Farpoint. Now, this was a game that I was kind of on the fence about mentioning or not, because Farpoint is a game that when it was released, I really enjoyed it, but I think I really enjoyed it on the basis that it was a competent enough first-person shooter that was done in VR. We didn't have that experience on PlayStation VR, and Farpoint really delivered. However, if you just look at Farpoint as a first-person shooter and look at what it does right and what it does wrong, it's really not an excellent game. However, given the fact that it is an FPS, given the fact that it is in VR, it can rely on the fact that it is a VR game and it does it good enough to make it a worthwhile experience. This is a game that I feel like won't age very well. Let's say in 3, 4, 5 years down the line, more first-person shooters are going to be released and they're just going to be of far higher quality than Farpoint. But as of this moment, if you go into Farpoint just expecting a quality VR experience, I think you will be left pleased. Next up, we have a PlayStation VR launch title, possibly the most anticipated game on launch, and that is Rig's Mechanized Combat League. This is another multiplayer game, far different than Firewall 0 Hour, however. It features you using these rig suits. There are many of them, and they all feature a different playstyle and their strengths and weaknesses, and you have to battle against one another. Now, the issue with rigs is that the player base isn't completely there at this point, but it's not like it's all too difficult to find a game. You can still have a lot of fun with it, and if you're looking for a quality multiplayer experience and maybe you're not completely sold on Firewall 0 Hour, I would say that's the better game, but Rigs is a solid one as well, and it does have an 85 on Metacritic, so me saying Firewall is a better game might be funny too because that game's sitting at a 79. Bear in mind, Rigs was a launch title, so the grade has to be a little curved at this point. I don't think it would sit at that 85 given what we got with Firewall.
The Dynamos are Rigs NCL World Champions!
Moving on, this is probably a game that will entice a lot of people, and that is The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim VR. Yes, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim has been released on just about every platform, last-gen consoles, current-gen consoles, PC, Switch. We even got that funny tease back at E3, but Skyrim VR was a legitimate re-release of Skyrim that I think was well-deserved, and Skyrim does make a smooth transition over to VR. Now, at the end of the day, this is Skyrim, so if you've played Skyrim a dozen times, which I'm sure the majority of you guys have, and you've gotten your fill of that experience, yes, VR will add a new element, but don't expect anything completely breathtaking that'll have you sit through the game start to finish again unless you were super captivated by the experience. If you were one of those people, one of those many people in fact that were super captivated by Skyrim, I think you should go out of your way to try out Skyrim in VR. And of course with this version you do get all of the downloadable content in there as well, so that is a nice inclusion. Skyrim VR has a 77 on Metacritic. Next up, we have a very unique game on VR, and that is Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes is a game that really showcased how unique a VR experience could be because it's more of a couch multiplayer VR experience, but of course, only one person can wear the VR headset. Well, it has one player in a virtual room with a ticking time bomb that they must defuse, and other players are the experts and they have to give instructions on how to defuse the bomb by deciphering the information found in the bomb defuse manual. Experts can't see the bomb, but the one that is in the virtual room can, so it really adds this cool, fun, quirky experience, and it's a game that you can find yourself constantly revisiting. Yes, it's not that traditional big budget experience, but Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes showcases how unique a VR experience can be, and its 88 on Metacritic is well deserved.
Always changing. And the risks rearranging. Find out why everyone's having such a blast. Don't just keep watching, keep talking, and nobody explodes.
Next up, we have one of the best PlayStation 2 games coming back on the PlayStation 4 with VR support, and that is Rez Infinite. If you guys aren't familiar with Rez, it was a fantastic music rhythm game released all the way back in the PS2 days, worked on by Tetsuya Mizugachi, who, by the way, is working on Tetris Effect, and that will have VR support as well, so that's something to be very excited about. But Rez Infinite is a fantastic game. It already had phenomenal presentation on the PlayStation 2, but now that you add that VR element, one might think that could have detracted away from the Rez experience, but no, it absolutely enhances what you're getting in Rez Infinite, and the soundtrack is still as great as ever. If you want a quality music rhythm experience with some trippy visuals, Rez Infinite is one to definitely check out. An 89 on Metacritic, and I can make an argument that's a little underrated. I myself would have bumped it up to that 90 tier. And lastly, we have another puzzle game, and that is Statik. Statik is a very well-designed puzzle game, but I do have to say there are some shortcomings with it. Namely, there isn't a lot of content to the game. However, with a puzzle experience, I think you're kind of expecting that going in. This was one of the earlier VR experiences on PSVR. It was released all the way back in early 2017, so you can still see some of those fundamental design flaws. However, I think the quality that you're getting as a puzzle experience, I would say that Statik is a worthwhile play, and visually, this is a very good-looking game. In terms of visuals on PlayStation VR, this might be one of the more underrated games on the entire platform. It's got an 84 on Metacritic, and I think that's a pretty accurate score, maybe even a little bit overrated in my opinion, but still, definitely would put it in that low 80 tier.
Statik Institute of Retention of Volunteers. They're explorers, adventurers, soldiers, warriors, athletes. I I could go on.
And that's gonna conclude this video. I know a lot of you guys are still not sold on PSVR. Maybe even with some of these games, you don't have that true system-defining experience that you're looking for, because while Astrobot Rescue Mission is fantastic, I just think as a charming platformer, that's a game that's not gonna be up everyone's alley. You don't have that big budget Witcher-style experience or a Killzone or a Horizon. A game of that caliber, however, if you want unique experiences, if you want games that deliver VR well, there are a lot of options now with PlayStation VR, and the library is gonna continue to grow with games like Tetris Effect, which looks absolutely fantastic. That's gonna conclude this video. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.